That's all big. But what the United Arab Emirates did about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, might be even bigger. Now, UAE is the seventh largest producer of oil in the world. They are an OPEC member. They were just admitted into BRICS right alongside of Saudi Arabia. They have traditionally been Western friendly. But about 2 weeks ago, they had a meeting there in Dubai that was, ironically enough, chaired by the head of the state-owned oil company for United Arab Emirates, where he at one point told the president of Ireland, "Yeah, if we do this, if we go green, we're going to send people back to the cave." He was saying these things because this summit, this United Nations summit, was on climate control. 200 countries from around the world were there, and 2 days before all these delegates from around the world showed up. And goes to show how pathetic our media is. MSN picked it up, and I can't really find it. It's still out there if you Google it. But the United Arab Emirates told the world 2 days before 200 countries come for a UN summit, hey, we're not going to take dollars for oil anymore. And if you Google MSN article, United Arab Emirates says won't take dollars for oil, you'll find it. This should be front and center everywhere, but it's
I
not.
covered it.
But what becomes even a little bit more interesting to that, and then I'll take any questions you got on that about this, what we've talked about, is that 1 or 2 days after all of these countries left Dubai, you had Putin make an impromptu trip, flanked by 4 Russian MiG aircraft, fighter jets, to the UAE. What did he have to say? He hasn't left the country but once or twice for the last few years because of the bounty on his head by the West. But did he say, hey, we were already signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia for protection? What happened to Gaddafi and Hussein when they said similar things? That's not going to happen to you. And then he went right from there to Saudi Arabia, where OPEC the next day announced a 2 million barrel reduction in oil production per day from 1 million. They upped it by a million. What was said to the leaders of the United Arab Emirates and to Saudi Arabia? This union is gaining credibility. It's gaining size and scope, legitimacy, military might, GDP, human population, percentage of natural resources, oil output, shipping lanes. All of these things are happening and accelerating. And to see the seventh largest producer of oil in the world, who just joined the BRICS, and an OPEC member saying, we're not going to take dollars anymore after all you guys signed an executive order to go green. It is the beginning of, I think, some very nasty things that could potentially happen for the dollar. And it's something that people should not lose sight of. Quite to the contrary, the fact that 30 countries have already formally applied, which would give it 40 countries, and 20 more have informally applied. That would be 60 countries. At what point does the world notice that, yeah, man, this is real? And I think that's one of the things that I think will dominate 2024. And one of the things I'm looking at very closely.
What would happen, do you think, to the dollar if the BRICS launches this currency, this digital currency backed by physical commodities? What would the United States do? Like, is there any, like, I just don't know. We're in foreign territory, pun intended.
Well, and one of the traits of the BRICS is to do things in a methodical fashion, to do it and make it legitimate before they issue. And I think that's why they tasked all of the finance ministers to go back to the drawing board and come back to the meeting in October. There's going to be over 200 political and economic and social events in 10 cities throughout 2024 before the big meeting in October, where I believe, they were tasked with coming back and presenting their findings for a common settlement currency. In the meantime, with the addition of Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, the BRICS now basically have surrounded the entire Persian Gulf. And when you add Egypt and Saudi Arabia to it, they have control of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. They are consolidating both physical control of land and sea. And this falls right in this whole Belt Road Initiative deal and all of these shipping lanes. It falls right in with the BRICS because you have this new northern sea route that Russia has just made that allows, you don't have to go around the Cape of I think it's called the Cape of Good Hope. Instead, you go right up through the northern sea route in Russia that they will allow permission to, that will save, I don't know, 10 days or whatnot. And when you look at, and the northwest north-south corridor as well, I think it's called, where they've built passageway between Iran and India, where it's not just all of the strategic commodities; it's the fact that they are building routes that will not be patrolled by the U.S. Navy. They will be building strategic trade routes that will allow the expansion and the delivery of
Yeah.
goods. When you look at the Belt Road, all of the maritime channels, the bridges, the roads, the train tracks, all of this stuff will only be driven on or used by commerce and military. It's not going to be for everyone just to drive around on. This is a
Right.
specific plan where they are trying, I believe, to not only acquire all of the commodities and pull all of them out of the ground, but be able to transport them. So they're covering all production, distribution, and accumulation, and using these strategic routes that the West won't have the ability to use, and will really put them behind the eight ball. So yeah, I think that's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it's 15,000 miles around the Cape of Good Hope.
Wow.
You're talking about a third of the way faster to go up through the Northern Sea route that Russia is building. And so these all connect with the Belt Road Initiative. And so you have this massive infrastructure of distribution that will be patrolled by military, and will be a kind of the Panama Canal on steroids for commerce in this portion of the world. And the West is not part of it. So if indeed you had OPEC say, look, we don't want to take dollars anymore for oil sales, very quickly you would see everyone on the planet have no need to stockpile them, as they have for over 50 years, creating this synthetic demand, and they dump them, which creates a very, very high likelihood of a hyperinflationary event here in the United States. And that's, we've talked about before, when interest rates go to the moon as a result of them. They did it to us, but did we incentivize them to do this? I mean, the Speaker of the House right now and basically the whole Senate are contemplating a plan, which they're going to announce by February, to, we've sanctioned the Russian assets. We sanctioned them, and we froze them. No interest on your treasuries. You can't access them, but they're still yours. That's why we gave the money back to Iran. We gave it back to them. It was theirs. Even though we sanctioned, they're talking about confiscating it and using it to fund the Ukrainian war, because the Congress doesn't want to give out any more appropriations. Well, when you do that, you've really crossed a line where no one will ever trust us again. And that's what is really happening here, is we are losing trust. We are losing confidence and faith, largely by our creditors for sure, but even by our foes, who, no one trusts us anymore. And that's why you're seeing countries shed bonds at a record rate and accumulate gold. I think when you look at gold's performance, and we can talk about that in a moment, but it's performed better than the bond market has. You go back to 2000, it's averaged 7.8% annual return. The S&P 500 index, 7%. The bond market, nowhere near that. You look at the average prices of what gold was, and we can talk about silver. I know this is a silver channel, and we'll talk about that. But as a proxy for the dollar, when you look at what gold has done over the last 3 years or 4 years, let me give you the numbers here. I think it's a little bit interesting. In 2017, let me see, where do I have that? Here we go. In 2020, let's start at 2020. 2020, gold was 1773 average price. 2021, 1798 average price. 2022, 1801 average price. 2023, 1943. It's the tortoise, not the hare. Not only has it outperformed everything since 2000, maybe with the exception of Bitcoin, in terms of its gain, but
Silver in 2020, but
yeah, but I mean, you go back to 2000, it's outperformed every single asset, traditional asset, and look at what it's done over the last 3 years in an environment where over the last year, we've seen 11 rate hikes, and the average price in 2022 was 1801. And in a year of rate hikes, where supposedly rising interest rates hurts the price of gold, it's $150 higher nearly than it was the year before on an average price. So it continues to march higher. But to me, what that symbolizes is countries dumping treasuries and accumulating gold. They're doing it in a manner that is very methodical. Kind of like when they talk about mass adoption in cryptocurrencies. I think you have to have mass adoption. Well, in theory, you could have 50 or 60 countries who are formally applied and admitted into BRICS by this time next year. The majority of human population, GDP, energy resources, shipping lanes, I mean, you name it. And it's legitimate. So when that happens, they won't let it happen until they're ready to make it work. And I think it's a disaster for the US. And not only would stocks, bonds, and real estate all collapse in the face of massively spiked interest rates, which would have to happen to compensate for the hyperinflation, but the banks, which are massively over leveraged and undercapitalized, would collapse. The whole banking system would. And I mean, it's the great reset. Stocks, bonds, real estate, the banks, and the dollar all collapse at once. And you have a villain to point to instead of blaming the Fed for their mismanagement of monetary policy, or the government for their horrible fiscal policy, and letting us get in this horrible financial position where we're nearly this close away from 130% debt to GDP. There has never been a country who ever crossed that line who didn't default or hyperinflate. We're at like 127% debt to GDP. We're right at that Rubicon. And instead of falling on the sword for allowing this to happen, you can blame Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC for doing this to us. And everything blows up, and they come in and issue a CBDC under modern monetary theory and make everyone whole when they sign on the line. Could that happen? Don't know, but everything up to that moment is factual. But when you talk about what could happen, yeah, Occam's razor says, is this by design, or is it just too stupid to be stupid? Or are politicians really, really that inept? I don't know the answer, but part of me feels like this is done to reset the system and find a villain to point to. But either way, I think it's going to be a difficult year in 2024 if this union of countries continues to their growing expansion and accelerating of it the way it has been. Ultimately leads to not really a good place for this country.